This is the Tampa 3, and it's the most underrated and overpowered coverage in all of Madden. I'm gonna take this simple coverage and try to do one of the toughest things in the game, go into all Madden head-to-head seasons in the Legends division, and win a Super Bowl against the sweatiest Madden players in the world. And if I can do that, while also teaching you guys 7 insanely valuable defensive lessons along the way, then just like I did in a similar video 2 years ago, then I'll once again be able to call myself the best defensive player in all of Madden. And to make things even tougher, this time I'm doing it with absolutely 0 abilities on my defense. So while this is what everyone else's defense is going to look like, this is what mine looks like. But before we get into the games, we need to address 2 big questions. What exactly is the Tampa 3 and what makes it so effective? Tampa 3 is a coverage shell that we can build out of the play cover 2 in the big nickel over G formation. Big nickel over G is unique because you get a different set of individual adjustments for your safeties and slot cornerback than you do in most of the other formations in the game. If we were in a formation like nickel over, then the individual adjustments for our safeties would look like this, giving us the option to put them on a deep half, inside third, or inside quarter. But in big nickel over G, the individual adjustments for our safeties look a little different, this time letting us put them on a deep half or an outside third on both the left and right sides of the field. With access to these unique adjustments, we can build our Tampa 3 coverage out of cover 2 in big nickel over G by putting each safety in an outside third and then putting our slot cornerback in a middle third. So while staying selected on your user, the exact button presses for that would be to double tap wire triangle to pull up your defensive back icons, select the icon of your left side safety, and press left on the left stick to put him on a left outside third, then double tap wire triangle again to pull up your defensive back icons, select the icon of your right side safety, and press right on the right stick to put him on a right outside third, and finally, double tap wire triangle one more time to pull up your defensive back icons, select the icon of your slot cornerback, and press up on the left stick to put him in a middle third. Now at this point you might be wondering, why run a Tampa 3 instead of just a normal cover 3? And there are 2 big reasons why Tampa 3 is better. Reason number 1 has to do with guarding the sidelines. If you run a normal cover 3, then one of your biggest weaknesses is the super popular streak and corner route combo. Against a standard cover 3, a streak will push the cornerback in the outside third deep, and then there's nobody to guard the corner route coming underneath the streak along the sideline. Even if you have your slot cornerback on a cloud flat and set his zone drops to 30 yards, he won't get there fast enough to guard the corner route because of where he's lined up when the ball is snapped. On the flip side, in a Tampa 3, by having the option to leave our outside cornerback on a cloud flat, that same streak and corner route combo is now completely covered because the outside third will once again take the streak, but this time we have a cloud flat sitting in perfect position to intercept the ball if our opponent tries to throw the corner route. And reason number 2 why Tampa 3 is better than a standard cover 3 is that it is awesome at baiting our opponents into throwing interceptions over the deep middle. If you look at the movement of our 2 safeties right after the ball is snapped, it makes sense that someone would think that this is a cover 2 shell, tricking them into thinking that they have the deep middle of the field wide open. Now remember that the Tampa 3 is just our base coverage. We're still going to be adjusting and adapting and shading our coverage based on the play style of each and every opponent we go against, but through it all, the Tampa 3 is going to be the foundation on which everything else is built. Now for a quick note on abilities, even though I'm going to attempt this Super Bowl run with 0 defensive abilities, if you play MUT or CFMs and can customize your abilities, I would have deep out zone KO on both of your safeties, flat zone KO on both outside cornerbacks, inside stuff on both defensive tackles, and either pick artist or lurk artist on as many players on the field as possible, because we all know how brutally difficult it is this year to catch an interception. A couple other random notes for our Tampa 3 setup are that I prefer to run it base aligned and with match turned on. This doesn't matter too much, but it feels like with match turned on, it gets the zones to play just a little bit tighter. Also, whenever I have time before the snap, I'll be pinching my D line, putting my user on a blitz assignment, and hovering near the line of scrimmage so that the green bar appears above my user's head, and that helps the pass rush come in just a little bit faster. So now that we understand what the Tampa 3 setup is and why it's so powerful, it's time for me to try and win an all Madden Super Bowl in the Legends division, as well as share with you guys my 7 super powerful defensive lessons that will take your game to the next level. In game number 1, I was taking on Say My Name 24866, and right off the bat, our 4-man rush was going crazy. On first down, we had everything deep covered and forced a hit on the quarterback. On third down, we again had everything deep covered and forced a huge sack. And on fourth down, we got to see exactly how the slot cornerback in the middle third can bait our opponents into thinking a throw is open, but actually being in perfect position to make a play on the ball. But my opponent had spotted something, and after I settled for 3 points on my first drive, my opponent on his next drive went back to that same spot on the field. This time, unfortunately, it led to us giving up a touchdown, but it teaches us the extremely valuable defensive lesson number 1, which is protect the seams. The seams are the vertical areas between our outside thirds and our middle third, and they're one of the best spots to attack a cover 3 shell. Now, in a standard cover 3, both seams are going to be somewhat open, but in our Tampa 3 coverage, we have one seam that's fairly well guarded by the slot cornerback dropping to the middle third, but that means the opposite side seam is left completely wide open. In order to protect this open seam, we have 3 different options. The first option is to simply drag your slot cornerback over to the middle of the field so that our coverage still looks like a cover 2 pre-snap, but now he can more easily guard either seam. The second option is to take your linebacker on that side and man him up on whatever player would be running a route up the seam, so typically a slot receiver or a tight end. The third and best option is to simply user with the linebacker on the side where your opponent might attack the seam, and that way, if they send a receiver up the seam, you can run with it, and if they don't attack the seam, then you can come back down with your user and guard over the middle of the field. So that touchdown up the seam was just a small bump in the road, and on the next drive, my opponent again tried to test our Tampa 3 coverage deep, but this time we picked it off with ease and took it all the way back for the touchdown. Other than the play later in the game when I forgot my own advice and once again gave up a touchdown up the seam, it was a solid performance overall, and we came out of game 1 with a 34-21 victory. In game number 2, I was taking on Kyle Stapes 12, who is in the divisional round of his playoffs, and once again, we forced an early interception after my opponent tried to test the deep middle of the field. On my first drive, I stalled out in the red zone and settled for a field goal, but on my opponent's second drive, a series of 3 plays bring us to defensive lesson number 2, which I call the bait and switch. Now, when you start to have success running a powerful coverage like Tampa 3 over and over again, there's a natural tendency to want to stay in that coverage on every play. But against a player who knows what they're doing, they will adapt to your coverage and start attacking your weak points. But after this huge sack on first down put him behind the sticks, my opponent wisely took checkdowns on the next 2 plays to bring up a crucial 4th and 5. Knowing that he was expecting me to once again be in our default Tampa 3 setup, I decided to switch things up on him. Anticipating that he would be looking for short underneath routes to convert on 4th down, I made 2 somewhat risky decisions with my coverage. First, I decided to shade my coverage down by pressing wire triangle and down on the right stick to turn my cloud flats into hard flats. And second, I chose not to put my slot cornerback on a middle third, meaning my user would be responsible for the entire middle of the field. I was taking a gamble that this new look would catch my opponent off guard, and that's exactly what happened. By baiting my opponent into thinking we'd be in one coverage and then switching things up on him on the most crucial play of the game, all 3 of his quick reads were covered immediately after the snap. Then I just had to wait for one of my D linemen to come in and get the sack to force the turnover on downs. After I scrambled for a touchdown at the end of the first half, my opponent went AFK and was eventually kicked, getting us out of there with a solid 10-0 victory. Now, game number 3 we're not going to talk about. Let's just say it involved having a field goal get blocked, getting very tilted, and making a lot of dumb mistakes. But that's okay, because even my Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a mid-season 38-3 loss on their way to winning the Super Bowl. So after that bump in the road, I was on to game number 4 against VL Vano, where on just the second play of the game, we got defensive lesson number 3, which is anticipate with your user. Your user is the most valuable tool you have on defense, and if you aren't usering with a linebacker, or preferably a safety subbed in at linebacker, then it's time to start right now. The key to having an effective user is to look for routes coming into your zone, and then as soon as you can, pass them off to another zone defender and look to guard a new route. The job of my user on this play was to guard the left middle of the field, so after the snap, I initially took away the drag that came into my zone. However, seeing that the drag was going to cross the field into zones where we already had defenders, I quickly pass him off and look for another route to guard. With no receivers staying short on the left side of the field, I immediately sprint upfield towards the gaping hole in my coverage, and sure enough, my opponent was trying to hit a post route in that exact spot, but but with my user getting there to make a play, the post never had a chance. That entire game ended up being smooth sailing, and after scoring a few touchdowns and catching a few more interceptions, we were out of there with a 20-0 victory. In game number 5, I was going up against Lil Kev Spottum, and while there weren't a whole lot of notable plays in this game, after taking a 17-7 lead, we once again got a perfect example of anticipating with the user when I initially ran with this streak from the solo receiver before coming back down to cut off the crosser for the easy interception. That pick 6 promptly forced a rage quit, and with a 20-7 victory, we were on to our next opponent. In game number 6, I was taking on Flyboy 757, and with a win in this game, we would be in the playoffs. I got off to a lightning quick start, hitting this beautiful dot along the sidelines before punching in the touchdown to take an early 7-0 lead. It was then on my opponent's first drive of the game that we encountered defensive lesson number 4, which is freestyle. What freestyling refers to on defense is the idea that sometimes we have to make adjustments that aren't necessarily ideal or smart to use on every single down. We want to use these weird adjustments on crucial plays throughout the game to take away the one threat that we know our opponent wants to hit, and that will force them out of their comfort zone. In this case, my opponent showed repeatedly on his first drive that his comfort zone was throwing to the running back. Whenever he was in a tough spot, his running back was clearly his first read and his favorite throw, so when I found myself looking for a stop on this 4th and 3 play, I had no choice but to freestyle by manning up my weak side linebacker on the running back. Obviously, when we look at the play art, this leaves a gaping hole in the right middle of the field, and with my user responsible for guarding deep over the middle, that spot would be completely unguarded if my opponent sent any of his receivers there. It was a calculated risk I had to take in order to make sure I took away my opponent's primary read, which was undoubtedly the running back. After the snap, I was fortunate that my opponent didn't send any routes into that empty part of the field, and by the time he spotted his only open receiver, I had a D lineman in his face to force an under pressure inaccurate penalty on his throw. The rest of the game we managed beautifully, and after coming away with this user lurk near the goal line in the final minute of the 4th quarter, we were out of there with a 17-7 victory and moving on to the playoffs. In my divisional round game, I was facing Shadowhunter 664, and this game could not have gotten off to a worse start when my running back fumbled on just the 3rd play of the game, and then a few plays later on 3rd and goal, my opponent threw a pass that I still think should have been guarded by my slot cornerback, but he let the tight end run right past him for the early touchdown. I then proceeded to fumble again, and my opponent proceeded to try and scramble around like a madman, chuck the ball straight into coverage, allow his quarterback to get absolutely blasted, and yet still found a way to get the ball in the end zone to take a 2-touchdown lead. The reason I'm showing you guys all of this is that it brings us to defensive lesson number 5, which is trust your scheme. A lot of players assume that just because they give up points to their opponent, they need to switch into a completely different scheme, but that's not always the case. In this game, where my opponent was trying insane rollouts, attempting back foot and crossbody throws, and straight up throwing at guarded receivers, I had to trust that if I stayed in my scheme, eventually my opponent would be punished for how recklessly he was playing. That's exactly what happened on my opponent's first drive of the second half when he continued trying the same antics he'd barely been getting away with all game. On a crucial 4th down, he once again threw into coverage just to have his running back get completely decked, and that incompletion gave us the ball back. I responded with a quick touchdown drive of my own, and on the following drive, my opponent threw the ball straight to my D lineman, who took it all the way back for a pick 6, and just like that, in the blink of an eye, we had a tie game. A huge goal line stop at the start of the 4th quarter put us in the driver's seat, and with 15 seconds left, I booted through the go-ahead field goal to get us out of that hell game with a 17-14 victory. In my conference championship game, my opponent was RTP Trap, and this was actually his Super Bowl, meaning we were in for an extremely tough game. It was a brutal first half, and after a few blown assignments and incorrect adjustments on my part, I quickly found myself in a 14-3 hole. But we kept fighting, and with this rushing touchdown on our following drive, a quick user interception, and another touchdown to close out the first half, we headed into halftime with a 17-14 lead. Our offense continued to light it up in the second half, and we jumped ahead to a 10-point lead, but after my opponent scored early in the 4th quarter to make it a 1-score game, it brought us to defensive lesson number 6, which is kill the clock. The best defense you can ever play is to make sure your opponent never gets the ball. With 3:37 remaining on the clock, and with my opponent having all 3 of his timeouts, this game was far from over, but if we could chew out the rest of the clock, then we'd be moving on to the Super Bowl. On this drive, with killing the clock as my #1 priority, I audibled to the play RPO Zone Alert Bubble in the formation Gun Bunch Open Tight End, which is a low-risk RPO that my opponent hadn't seen all game, and that allowed me to easily attack the edge and pick up 9 yards while staying in bounds to keep the clock moving. On the next play, I once again came out in gun doubles hip, and this time I audibled over to RPO Alert Screen and the pistol double stack formation. Again, my opponent hadn't seen this all game, and it allowed me to easily run the ball for a first down. After a high percentage check down to my running back, followed by another run play, on 3rd and 5, I knew I was in 4-down territory and dialed up my best pass play. My opponent had all my underneath routes guarded, but that left my deep crosser wide open, and my receiver hauled it in for the huge first down. That conversion allowed us to run the rest of the clock out and secure the 24-21 victory to send us on to the Super Bowl. Finally, it all came down to this. I was in my Super Bowl taking on TTV 410 Pluto, the final challenger who stood in our way. He came out playing aggressive, immediately attempting an onside kick, but we responded instantly with a huge 33-yard run on the first play of the game, and just 2 plays later punched it in to take a 7-0 lead. Getting a stop on my opponent's first drive would be monumental, and that brings us to defensive lesson number 7, which is know the meta. The meta unofficially stands for the most effective tactics available, and in Madden, it refers to the most popular and most effective plays and formations based on how the game is coded in that particular year. The meta is typically set by pro players in MCS tournaments, and their tactics then get copied and shared by the rest of the Madden player base. This year, one of the most popular formations in the game is gun bunch offset, which is what my opponent came out in on his first drive. If you ever see the gun bunch offset formation, then there's one play that should be instantly on your mind: double post. There are tons of reasons why double post is so good, but one of the biggest reasons is that it is extremely easy to bomb cover 3 by throwing to this unique post route from the outside bunch receiver, especially when you combine it with a streak from the middle bunch receiver. On this play, right after the snap, we can see that the outside bunch receiver isn't running in a perfectly straight line, but his route is angled slightly to the outside. That instantly tells us that he's on the extremely powerful post route on the play double post, and we're going to have to guard it manually. After briefly staying low as if I was guarding the drag, I sprinted straight up the field to where I knew the post was headed. My opponent was locked in on that route since he'd probably successfully thrown it 1,000 times before, but because I was familiar with the meta, I saw right through his plan and forced the interception to put us in great position to win the game. Now, my opponent was no slouch, but that stop put us far enough ahead that we were able to maintain a 2-score lead, and as the final seconds ticked off the clock, we secured one final interception to officially claim our Super Bowl championship and allow me to once again earn the title of the best defensive player in all of Madden. And guys, I do have a full Kansas City Chiefs Big Nickel Over G ebook on PlaybookProfessor.gg, which has a ton more setups than just Tampa 3. It goes over all the different plays that I use. It has formation-specific setups like gun bunch defense, gun tight defense, and gun trips defense, and it even has red zone defense and run defense setups as well. Your membership gets you access to all the ebooks on the site, including the Chargers Gun Doubles Hip ebook, which is the offense that I was running for this entire Super Bowl run. You'll also get access to all the tip videos in our film room section as well. And even if you have no interest in spending money, there's also a free membership option as well, which is truly free, and that gives you full access to both the Eagles Gun Bunch Offset ebook and the Kansas City Chiefs Gun Tight Open ebook. So even if you don't want to spend a dime, it's still absolutely worth heading over to PlaybookProfessor.gg and checking those out. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you learned something from this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.